Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness, the app designed to get you where you want to go. So if you're looking for a new fitness routine tailored to outdoor pursuits, use the promo code Okayest30 to get a free 30-day trial. And my guest today is a friend, a musician, and an advocate for all things Western history and lore. He is the founder of HawkenHorse Band and has 3 albums under his belt with another on the way this July. You may have heard of him on the Bear Grease podcast. Read about him in Fur Fishing Game, or if you are like me, you have jammed out to his tunes on your trap line. By way of Nashville, Tennessee, and of course, my screen restarts right as I'm doing my reading. Andy Wills, welcome to the show.
Whoa. Hey, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited as I scroll back down to my notes, so give me a second. But as I find my place in the internet sphere of where everything happens to be, you and I have actually met in person, which is one of the rare things that I don't get to enjoy with most of my guests, which is pretty awesome. We met in Nashville, Tennessee at the SCI conference. You were one of the lucky, I think, 4 attendees to my seminar, which was pretty awesome. But, going back further from there, do you remember the first time in your life, whether it was a kid, young adult, an adult, that you were ever exposed to trapping in any capacity, be it real life, film, music? When were you first, drawn to trapping as a profession?
I think the first time I remember, I was probably about 10, 11 years old, and I was doing a lot of fishing. I was a big fisherman, and my dad and I were down there at the lake, just from the bank, fishing, catching bass. And a guy was walking around the side of the lake there, and it was somebody who we kind of knew, not really well, but we knew. He lived in town, and I think my dad and he had played softball or something. There was some connection there. We knew. But anyway, he was checking a trap line. And I remember him talking about it with my dad. And I was like, whoa, I was just super interested because I was in the outdoors anyway. I'd already, I love me some Davy Crockett and all that stuff. But the outdoors was everything. And then I'd never heard of trapping. This was like a new element of the outdoor world that was just foreign to me. And I heard him talking about it and how he caught a fox that day. And I was just mesmerized hearing about it. And I remember on the drive home, my dad kind of explaining it a little more in depth because they were having an adult conversation. And I was like, what are they talking about? So he kind of filled me in. He's like, well, yeah, it's another way of hunting. And I remember to this day, I remember the place I was standing on the side of this lake, when he walked through, and I don't remember his name anymore, but that was my first exposure to trapping. And I'd say it was a pretty positive one because I heard it directly from a trapper who was actually out there doing his thing. And I was like, whoa, that's cool.
And was this if my memory serves, you're from Ohio. So was this a lake in Ohio or was this somewhere else?
Yep, it's in Ohio and south, kind of outside of the Dayton area, and it was mostly like a fishing lake. It was a stream fed, and I call it a lake. It was a very, very, very big pond marsh area. It was a great trapping place. I would say it was nothing but bullfrogs and great herons and raccoon tracks and you name it. It was kind of perfect habitat for a fur-bearing critter.
That's awesome. So that was the first time that the world of trapping opened up to you. Like, do you remember, did you do any investigation after that, or was that just one of those core memories that got tucked away for a while?
It was a core memory that was just always kind of there. I was definitely interested, and I remember in the following years, I think I found a book about it at the library. I was a dedicated library goer. So, in the days before just Google, it was like, oh, I got to drive to the library and pick up some history and or outdoor books is all it was for me. But I got a couple about trapping, um, and a few really old, more historical trapping books too, which were probably not as much help to me at that age as they are now. I find them fascinating now, books from the 1800s, and they're very useful actually. But that being your first kind of study about it is probably not the best way to go. I feel like for things like trapping, firsthand education is like everything. It's
Yeah,
you can't reading in a book is helpful and it can get you there eventually, but you're going to have a lot of hard knocks along the way. I feel like.
yeah, mentorship is definitely key, especially in something like trapping. But did you ever get a little wily as a kid then when you were kind of reading these books? Did you ever, set like maybe a basic trap, like even just like the shoebox with a stick, how far down did you go when you got the books?
It became it was the snares really caught my attention. I don't know if it was the famous scene from Davy Crockett and the River Pirates when George E. Russell gets his foot stuck in a snare and goes sailing off in the air. Uh, I was partially interested in creating human snares, which I don't know how realistic that is, but I think any little boy, that's a natural progression. You're like, what am I capable of? So I definitely was into like figuring out how to make anything that, you know, I wasn't really into the deadfalls as much as snares. I never really got a steel trap until late high school. I was walking through an antique store and there was an old, like
A foothold of some
a
sort, like the
foothold.
long
Yeah.
spring.
Yeah. From like, probably from the 50s or 60s. It's an older one. And that was the first one I ever bought. It was late high school and it's kind of lived in my studio ever since. I see it hanging over there actually.
Yeah, it's funny, in my normal camera days, I mean, I'll pan over here for people, but I've got a few old long springs on the wall next to a beaver pelt, but
Nice.
there is something about those that just and this is actually a great segue to the next question that I had for you is, whether you're a kid coming up, like even you as a high school student walking through an antique shop, were drawn to a steel trap and it probably brought about a sense of nostalgia. And what I always say is trapping is truly a time machine, but I think music is that same kind of time machine too. So, for folks who don't know, I mean, if they haven't listened to your music, I'll tell people, hey, you should go on Spotify, look up HawkenHorse. Especially if you're a trapper, you're gonna get just jazzed up about it. But your music does the same thing that trapping does for me. Truly, it is a time machine and takes me back. So, what is it about the era of or the era that inspires a lot of your music that gets you so excited? Is it the same feeling of like finding that antique trap in a store, or like what is it about that era of mountain man that just has drawn you to build a musical career around it?
Well, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I've always been a story guy. I'm fascinated by stories, and not just any story though. Like I love any story, but the true stories are the ones that get me. And I I'm all for, fiction. I'm all for that kind of stuff, but even when it comes to movies, but when I see based on a true story, I'm like, you got my attention. Uh, so story is a huge part of it, and hearing stories about some of these famous trappers who saw some incredible sights, you know, Jedediah Smith and Jim Bridger and Hugh Glass and on and on and on. You read some of their stories and what they witnessed, what they survived, what how they had an entire year's worth of pelts, which was a lot of money back then, to have them stolen by the natives, or to go to Rendezvous and basically blow all their money
Mhm.
in like a month. It's I'm just fascinated because it actually happened. It's, you know, that stuff gets to me, and being a living human actually making music, I just relate more to that than I do Batman. No offense, Batman, but I
You and me
get.
both, man. I agree 100%. Like that
Yeah.
knowledge that someone I think for that era, for me, it's perseverance, right? Like it's hard to oftentimes put yourself in those shoes and understand how they did survive the harsh winters, the natives, getting
Mm.
pelts without getting eaten by a grizzly. There's all these different elements that even today, when you go in the woods or you go to a national park or something, you can kind of get like a little appreciation for how
Mhm.
difficult those things are. But then when you sit down and really hear these stories, you're like, I have no idea how they did that. It's amazing.
And those are the people I just mentioned. Those are the ones that survived.
Mhm.
we, there's so many who went out there who got on a, they hitched a ride to Independence, Missouri, and struck out west, and they were never heard of again. I mean, it's the famous ones are the ones who made it a long time. So I think it's the challenge of it all. It's just that is the American spirit to me, is that setting off and making your way, and you know pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and making it happen, and all the odds are against you, and I'm going to figure a way out. It's getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go check your line. I mean, that is the essence of taking things into your own hands and making your future your own, and that's kind of the American way. And so I feel like the Trapper is the perfect example of that. And so in my music, I find it fascinating, and the American West and the settling of this country, I find it fascinating and romantic. It's just like, oh, what if I had been there? And it's exciting.
And for you, like with that process of creating a song or a set of songs into an album, like what does that creative process look like for you? Do you try to like go and live it? Like, for instance, I know many of your songs are about flintlock style weapons. And I know
Yeah.
for a fact that you actually go out and shoot a lot of black powder.
Yeah.
Um, is it the same for like when you start to sing songs about trappers? Do you ever shadow anybody on a trap line? Do you do a little trapping yourself these days? Like, what does that creative process look like from start to finish?
Yeah, I definitely like to get my hands dirty to better understand it. I When I first started writing my self-titled debut, which has "Man of the Mountain Land" and some of my other trapping songs, I I live, just so you know, I live in a like residential area. I don't live on top of a mountain, unfortunately, like you. I wish I did, but I I bought a couple dog proofs, and I was like, I'm gonna try to figure this out. And so there is like a little wood line behind my house, and I was like, I gotta get my hands dirty. I gotta try this, And so I did. I finally I caught a skunk, of all things, in my backyard,
Good man.
and yeah, it was pretty amazing. And I was green. I didn't know what I was doing. Just keep this in mind. So, but I was proud. I was very proud, and it was a little smelly because I didn't know what I was doing.
Did
To
it
say,
spray when you were trying to dispatch or
yes,
the rustle of it all?
Yeah, I got to thinking, I was like, a skunk is probably the one thing you definitely want, you know, a 22 or something to kind of, yeah. Anyway, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just figuring things out, but I knew that I wanted to experience some of this on my own. And I also, not just the act of actually trapping, but being more aware of tracks. And like when I'm even out deer hunting, I am more aware and I'm finding tracks and identifying them. Like I'm pushing myself and challenging. These are things that I never really made an effort to because I don't know. My head was thinking about Boone and Crockett deer, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they really exist in Tennessee, but a
You can
man can
always
dream.
hope. Yeah, you got a dream.
You got to dream.
But I'd like to know too, in that experience, so like that's part of your process, right? So you're
Yeah.
starting to write this, debut album. You're like, I need to
Yeah.
actually trap something. You set some dog
Yeah.
proofs. You catch your first skunk. I know what I felt when I trapped my first animal, which was a fox, right? And it was a fox
Yeah.
that kind of outwitted me for an extended period of time. Um, do you remember what that feeling was like, even just coming up on that skunk, like outside of the initial fear, like, oh crap, I caught a skunk. But the kind of pride, like you said, you were proud.
I was almost surprised. Like I was at the point where I didn't think I was going to catch anything. I was like more worried I was going to catch the neighbor's cat, you know.
Mhm.
Like but when I saw a non-domestic animal, it was like, "Oh, dang." Like I was extremely proud. Very proud and like I said almost like I don't know. I don't know if I doubted myself or I was going off of YouTube videos and, you know, your podcast. I didn't know what I was doing.
So that so you dispatch your skunk. Did you do
Yeah.
anything with it? Like I don't see you wearing a skunk hat right now, which is a little disappointing. But
Yeah.
were you able to harvest the hide, or was it a little too far gone, or what was the ultimate end result for that first catch?
It it is it's kind of around. It's I didn't know really what to do with it. It's out in my back shed because I didn't know smell wise what to do with it. Uh gosh, my part of me was just glad I got this guy because a year before my dog got sprayed. So this was kind of personal. So the fact that I got him was like extra meaningful to me. Um
I'm sure your dog was happy too.
oh yeah, I think he felt like he was part of this harvest. I mean, he feels just as much pride in it, but so I mean, I don't know if it's salvageable. I don't know. But it did whet my appetite and now I'm like, "Ooh." And I have my fleshy knife. I have my board. I've got all my stuff. It's there ready. That particular one was kind of a disaster, but I'm learning.
Hey, everyone is the first time around, but open call. So Tennessee trappers listening here, and you're in central. I mean, you're outside of Nashville, right?
Right, right.
If you're in central Tennessee and you want to take Andy on your trap line, reach out.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that'd be awesome to share because, like you said at the beginning, like one of the hardest things with trapping is finding that hands-on mentorship because you can learn on your own. You can do the
Yeah.
YouTube, but man, it beats down the learning curve, and especially when you get a stinky critter. And ironically, you are now the third person in the last 2 weeks that have found an inspiration to try trapping that I know personally who caught their first animal and it was a non-target catch of a skunk. So you are now number 3 in the last 3
Wow.
weeks of somebody who is just starting to trap and caught a skunk the first time. So
Huh.
it's something in the air.
That's amazing. I who would have thunk it?
Yep.
I
And one in Montana, one in Texas, and one in Tennessee.
by the way, I have my pine marten right here. This is one of my prized studio buddies, man. This
Awesome.
guy
Yeah.
is
For folks listening, when Andy and I had the chance to meet up in Nashville, I took him a pine marten that I had caught and tanned, and I'm glad to know it's still not living, but residing.
Yeah, he's
in the
residing.
studio.
That's right.
Well,
I'm
that's
trying to
cool.
figure out some creative use for him, like on a mic stand or something that he could a more useful job than just hanging around. We'll figure that out.
That's a pretty useful job. So, Man of the Mountain Land, you kind of talked a little bit about that. That is one of my favorite songs. So myself out in the middle of nowhere, sitting in my truck or my side by side, listening to that song before slinging my actual traps over my shoulder, and then getting to hear the lyrics, steel trap over my shoulder. And then you get hit with that next bit of, I'm a trapper by trade, earning wages with my blade. Man, that gets me fired up. And again, trappers who haven't heard your music, go listen to it. It will make you want to run through walls like the Kool-Aid Man and go, boil and dye your traps. But I'm curious, out of all the songs you've written to date, what's your favorite song and why?
Wow. I would have to say my favorite. It's probably, I know,
it's like asking which one of your kids is your favorite.
Yeah, and I've written so many at this point. Free is definitely one of my favorites because I'm gonna give you two songs.
Okay.
One is Free, just because it's kind of where it all started. That's where HawkenHorse started. I was driving north to northern Wisconsin for deer season, and I was just kind of over the Nashville pop country scene. I was just over it, and I was like, what am I gonna do? I just want to do something that I want to write. I want to do something that I love. And
wait, you were tired of doing Florida Georgia line covers?
Yeah, it just wasn't fulfilling at all. And so the idea for HawkenHorse came to me on that drive. And Free, I was working on that song over the drive and sitting in the tree stand up there. And I remember I was sitting up there. I was just, by myself in this tree, and probably 25 miles south of Lake Superior. And I hadn't seen a deer all day, but I did see a huge Wisconsin black bear, and it was really a special thing. I was very grateful for that moment to see him. He was like at 70 yards, and he never made a sound. I didn't even hear him. I saw him for a solid 10 minutes working his way, but I never heard him. And the lyrics to Free started popping in my head, and it's, once you're free, you don't go back.
You're going to die like that.
You're going to die like that. And I was just like, anyway, that's where that song kind of came from. And so that song's important just because it is HawkenHorse. It's just where it all started. Another song I really love is Setting Sun, because the analogy, I just feel like people like us were the same as those explorers from, the 1700s and the 1800s, those Daniel Boones and those Kit Carsons. The day we were born, we were like the sun. We were on fire and headed west. And, I don't know why, but that song just speaks to me. Like, the moment I wrote it, I was like, I don't care if anybody likes this song. This one's for me. But thankfully, a lot of folks do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's an understatement of the year, to be honest. I'm going to dovetail into the next question, and I think it's going to feed off of that answer you had for that song, the Setting Sun, that analogy. Why do you feel, or do you feel, I know I do, that we're a minority of folks who are not disconnected from the past, from our food sources, from the land? Like, even if we live in suburbia, like, we're at least making an attempt to get out there to experience life through hunting, traditional hunting, trapping,
Mm-hmm.
being out there. Why is that such a rarity today? And why is it almost demonized to, hold that deer and try to hold on to it a little bit? I'm just curious what your
Yeah.
thoughts are, because I'm sure you get it from your music too, just like we would from the trapping world.
I think there's just a huge generational disconnect where just a generation of people who grew up in a totally electronic world with a Walmart, like everything you ever wanted, you just bought. Like I feel like it's foreign. I don't think it's even, you know, it's not that they had a firsthand experience that went bad or something. It's just it's so foreign to them. It must be wrong. And I think if a lot of those people actually had an experience to go with somebody to see firsthand the farmer saying, yeah, this dang coyote's like getting in my chicken coop, and the frustration that this coyote's having on this farmer, or, you know, goodness, I mean, they're they're banning all kinds of stuff out west right now. I feel like if they were actually boots on the ground experiencing that, they would have a much different opinion. Um, and I feel like that is also kind of the solution to that is getting them to experience that. And I'm not going to lie, that's definitely an agenda of my music. I'm trying to get people hooked, and I want them to want a muzzleloader. I want them to buy a box of traps, and I want them to, get out there and climb a mountain. You know, I, I'm definitely not trying to, I don't know, feed a generation of gamers necessarily. I'm trying to get people outside, and it's
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 working, I
something.
hope. It's another question I had for you too
Yeah,
on the heels of that, as I'm looking through my little list, is I think that's a great agenda. It's worked for me. It gets me excited to get out there. It brings history back to the fore to say, hey, we're not as
yeah.
far removed. But have you had any instances where a fan or somebody who's listened to your music has reached out and said, hey, I didn't realize trapping was still a thing. I didn't realize muzzleloader hunting was still a thing. And I went out and bought a CVA, or I went out and I bought a box of Duke traps. And have you had that experience yet in your career?
Absolutely. Like I'm telling you, it's amazing. I am probably once a week I answer a question about trapping, muzzleloading, primitive archery. Like for some reason, I think people look at me and they go, "Oh, he's approachable," and like they feel comfortable in asking me. And I think that's partially because I'm not clearly not a know-it-all. I don't know all the answers. I mean, I freaking butchered a skunk.
You and me
So,
both, buddy.
but I'm happy to talk about it, and I'm excited to talk about it. So I think people are so ready to, they feel like, oh, I can ask him because he won't belittle me for not knowing, because that's a lot of it. I mean, I've read your awesome book. It's hard when you're learning this stuff later, and you're kind of just you're on YouTube and you're trying to figure things out the hard way, and you kind of get a late start, I guess, and you're almost embarrassed that you don't know some of this stuff. And I feel like being approachable it's the answer to filling this gap of, this is, I don't want to say it's like the lost generation, but there's this gap where this kind of knowledge was just kind of ignored and forgotten, and people are coming back to it right now. I mean, it seems like everybody's got a freaking chicken coop now.
Yeah, it is. I love it. A lot of people are turned off by it, I think, with it becoming almost more of a fad, but I think it's great. And
Yeah.
with people reaching out to you, and this is another completely loaded question, maybe a hard
Yeah.
question to answer. Do you derive more joy out of getting a song out there and, reaching new heights, like in, the charts or whatever it is that you're measuring yourself against from a musical career success,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody reaching out to you and saying, hey, because of what you've created and that I listened to, I have now, enhanced my life by trying something new? What's more impactful for you?
Oh, definitely the person that I had an impact on and who are, embracing this and taking it to another level. I met a young guy the other day who Drake Pledger, he's got a YouTube channel, and he said my music was like such an inspiration to him, and it's actually got him. He bought a flintlock, and he's going more into the living history interest, and part of that I think would involve trapping at some point. But he's a great example of that. He is just diving headfirst into it. And I talked to another guy. He just bought a flintlock kit he's building, and he wants to take it muley hunting.
Oh, wow.
Coming up here this year, so he's trying to get that kit done. It's so many people are like, they text me or message me and they go, so where do you get traps? And I'm just like, let me tell you,
Mm-hmm.
they're not hard to get.
If you can go to your Walmart, your Shields, or your D&B a lot of times, and you can
Yeah,
find them.
yeah, absolutely.
And then with that, like the living history thing is interesting to me too. So, the guy who you kind of helped inspire to
Yeah.
kind of create a YouTube channel around that, do you have a favorite Western historical figure? I guess it doesn't have to be Western because, lines were blurred back then. Everything was
Yeah.
Western, even Tennessee. And an interesting story about that favorite historical person, and you get double points if it has to do with trapping.
Oh, okay. I want double points. So let me think real quick. I would. Well, trying to tie it into my record potentially here.
Oh yeah, do it. I know you've got a whole record coming out that's kind of a swath of time, right? What is it, late 1700s?
Yeah.
80s?
Yeah, so I have a lot of trappers will know John Coulter, who is probably my favorite from the Rocky Mountain region, but he was a part of the Corps of Discovery and was with Lewis and Clark as a hunter and I think a paddler too. But when they got to, I believe, the Montana line, he was like, "Can I leave?" And this is on the way back, and he's like, "I just kind of." Well, the truth is, he had like a bunch of debt back in St. Louis, and he didn't want to go back. So he had met these two trappers, and he was like, I want to go with them. So Lewis and Clark actually said, okay, we're basically done. So he got to go with them, and they trapped for a long time doing the circuit. And there's a song actually on this upcoming record, and it's about Coulter and his famous Coulter run. And that story is one of my favorite stories of all time, and I'm sure a lot of trappers already know this story, but the main point is he and his buddy, whose name was also John, they were in the canoe paddling up the river, and they came around the bend, and boom, there's the Blackfeet Indians all down the bank, and they're like, come over here. And John Coulter's like, he puts his hands up like, don't shoot me. And his buddy had another idea, and he tried to get away. And anyway, I think he wound up with about 30 arrows in him. But anyway, John Coulter was told to go run for his life naked. They stripped all his clothes off, and he had to take off running for his life. And thankfully for John, he was a really fast runner. Like he was just born genetically just a great runner. And he was able to outrun most of them except one young warrior who was pacing him pretty good, and he ended up actually killing him and surviving and making it all the way back to his friends who just couldn't believe this, wow, what happened to John. And he's like, oh well, he's dead. But so I have a song. I actually took on this amazing story, which was kind of a big task.
Endeavor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it from Coulter's point of view, or the Indians, or the other poor guy?
It's kind of a omniscient perspective, just telling the story. And little fun fact, I did it to a jogging tempo. Because he's running for his life. So there's your little nugget.
Oh, that's pretty good. I can't wait to listen. Do we get to know what the title of that song is so we can skip to it when the album comes out?
Yeah, it's just called Coulter Run.
That's a pretty dang good title for that story. Well, I think you get double points because that definitely involved, historical figure and trapping, and we got to tie in the new album. With the new album, and it kind of dovetails back to the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you just have a backlog of these stories that you've just held on to for a while that, you've read about, or maybe you've been out to a museum, or you've been to these different places? Or do you already kind of know what you're wanting to write songs about and then kind of go and find that information and get more detail until inspiration hits?
It changes by the album and by the project, like where my head is and how I'm going about it. But this particular one, I had written a couple songs that I really loved, and they didn't seem to fit with another song that I had written. And the more I thought about it, I had recently watched Centennial, which was a mini series from late 60s, early 70s. And it tells like this big swath of history. It starts with a fur trapper, Pascal, and it goes into the early 1900s. And so I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do like I don't want it to just be about, just this little era of time. I wanted to be a bigger theme. So on this album, it was kind of more, some were ideas that I'd wanted to write for a long time. Some I had already written. And then others were, I was learning. I would dig into a book and I would look for an interesting story. And then some of them aren't directly a historical account of something, but it maybe more just captures an event or an emotion or an activity that was happening during that era. So it's kind of a canned answer. It depends, but it's kind of true. It's more it's weird how the creative process works. You just start writing, and then it starts just happening, and then you go, oh, okay, and then you start filling in holes. And it's interesting that the single I just released, Shikanahay, was one of the last songs I wrote for the whole project, and it's probably one of my favorites from the whole project. But it's just funny how it comes together. The creative process is not,
it's not linear.
No, it is not linear, and it's not like, it's not like punching rivets. It's all over the place, and it depends what mood I was in that day. Like the Coulter song literally took me almost a month to write because I had all this weight on my shoulders. I was like, this is such an iconic story. I cannot screw this up. And so I started over so many times, and then I wrote on it, and then I tweaked on it, and other songs I sat down and wrote it in 30 minutes and it's done. So it's funny how the mind and creativity works.
It seems like there is so much inspiration to be had with those past generations, but I'm curious, like, what's your take on modern hunting, modern trapping? Do you ever see a world where you're writing songs about the modern hunter, the modern trapper, like, or is the lore and mystique and, hardship kind of been taken out of what we're doing today? Or is there still space to have that kind of, raw experience like the John Coulters had?
Yeah, I think I do think hunting and even some trap. I mean, I think trapping is challenging. It doesn't matter what kind of equipment you have, but some of the hunting stuff it's all, I don't want to say it's easy, but like compared to using a flintlock, in it's
Wet
raining,
powder.
wet powder, and your quarries like across a canyon, like in, I mean, modern hunting is definitely easier. I mean, it's obvious, but I think every hunter, maybe you have so many, furs on the wall, as they say, and maybe it's not as rewarding, and you kind of go the other direction. You're like, now I want to take a deer with a longbow instead of a compound. Maybe instead of my 6.5 Creedmoor, I want to take one with
50 caliber.
a 50 cal
Yeah.
Hawken. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lure to do it just to see if I can do it. I think that's part of it. It's just like, am am I man enough to do it? It's almost that kind of thing. So I have dabbled a little bit in modern hunting. I've done a couple feature songs with Bullitt County, and they're more like outdoor, like modern era outdoor stuff. But even the songs I've done with them have a old school vibe to them, the ones I've been involved. So like Orion is a bow hunting one that I did with them, and even that talks about Orion and Nimrod from the Bible, and talks about like just having a longbow, and it's primitive driven, I guess. So yes, I have done it, but I think you've got me. Like, it's still that pining for the old ways. I'm realizing this live right now.
Yeah. It's hard to. My hope is that we can get to a point where, the gamesmanship, maybe not necessarily danger in every scenario. Like, you shouldn't have to fear for your life every time you go out to your trap line, right? That,
Right.
another individual is going to scalp you. But like finding that way of exposing yourself to that. And that might be through primitive means for hunting. It might mean trapping somewhere way out in the back country where you can't just drive up with your truck. Maybe you got to strap on your snowshoes or do something like that to kind of to get that feel. But I think people have to seek that out. Whereas in the past, that was just, if you were trapping, that was your life. Like, it was,
Yeah.
you didn't have a say in whether it was dangerous or not. It was dangerous. Whereas today,
Right.
you can choose kind of the fidelity of your experience. And I think most people, maybe not by some, you know, true desire, are kind of going for the easier end. It's just more accessible and it's a
Right.
little bit better bounds. But my hope is we can get back there and you're writing songs about modern huntsmen, modern trappers, and there's a reason to. But I think we're a little far off from that.
That's a good point. I Yeah, I think it's accessible and people have never been busier, and it's just the easy thing is the easy thing. So I do understand why that happens, but my personality is slow things down, think about it. I'm like a philosopher up here more than I'm a thinker. I like reading, I like thinking, I like sitting and not uttering a word for a long time. Like that's that's me.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm not going to give you the time to sit and not respond. So you have to respond with
Okay.
words.
Okay.
Um, but what do you think is the biggest modern misconception about trapping? And it could also be a misconception about trapping in the past if you want to go that route. But what is just like if you went up to somebody in a Walmart or a Target, and what do you think their understanding or a misconception would be that they would probably hold?
Well, I would think they would think it was inhumane. That's probably the number one thing that people assume,
Mhm.
but it's just not. It's just not. I mean, it's just the truth. And in the especially the latest traps, I mean, the newest things are very, very humane and they don't harm the animals. So I can understand the older traps; they were a little more detrimental, and I get that. But modern traps, I mean, goodness, I mean, even if a dog steps in the thing,
Yeah, you can usually
it's
let them go with no worse for the wear, right? I mean,
yeah,
like you said, I
exactly,
think people have that old mental model of a trap with teeth, right? And that's just
yeah,
A, illegal first.
right,
Um, but B, like you said, the technology has gotten so much that you have offsets, you have swivels built into your chain for
yeah.
a dog set or a canine set, rather. And, if there are lethal traps, whether that be snares or conibears, they're very quick and very humane and probably provide a better, you know, departure from this earth than that animal would likely have had in its own natural way whenever that time would have come.
I think the problem is the public's main exposure to trapping is like Looney Tunes.
Mhm.
I mean, they're picturing these, like you said, a big teeth trap, and Elmer Fudd, and they don't think about it. They don't know. I mean, it's just ignorance, is what it is.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate your open agenda to kind of hopefully change people's minds through your music. Um, Having spent a lot of time out in the woods as a boy, young adult, practicing a bunch of different techniques in hunting, what's the craziest or most wild experience you've ever had in the woods?
Well, the one that comes to mind instantly was only about 8 or 9 years ago. I think it was here in Greater Nashville. I was bow hunting, and it was, I don't know, probably like October 20th, 25th in that world somewhere, and I was climbing a ridge. I have a piece of ground I get to hunt down south of Columbia, Tennessee, and I was climbing a steep ridge, and it was early, like super early, and I was trying to get up to this white oak tree before the sun came up, and I was huffing and puffing. This is a steep, steep ridge, and I was huffing and puffing. I get all the way to the top of this ridge, and I hang a right, and I go probably 100 yards, and I just hear this screech as loud as I could. It just pierced the night, and my heart just stopped. And it was literally 15 feet, 20 feet away, like super close. And I clicked on my headlamp because it was kind of a bright moon, so I was walking by the moon, and I flipped on my headlamp, and there was a bobcat and her two kits, like right there, and that blood curdling scream in the middle of the night when you're just like thinking you're by yourself. That'll get you, man. That'll make you shiver a little bit. But she ran off. Thank God she didn't think I was trying to get her kits, but that was like the most heart thumping moment, just because it got me by surprise, I would say.
So you clicked your headlamp on and you quickly found out it was a bobcat. But what was the first thought in your head? Like, were you like, I'm abducted? Like,
Yeah.
probes come in, or like, what was the thought?
Yeah, I had no idea. I was just, all I know is I was like, it's creeping up on Halloween and somebody's screaming at me like a crazy vampire. And I was like, I'm about to die. But it thankfully was just a bobcat. So
Did you shoot a deer after that at least?
I didn't. I didn't. It was apparently the bobcat was a bad omen. I should have just turned around and left, but
I don't know. Maybe it was a good omen. It was pretty cool. That's a cool experience. And I think
it
that's,
is.
To me, those things come across in your songs. Like, I know you don't have a bobcat with a kid screaming at you song, but like those kind of ethereal experiences in the woods that people miss out on today, they can feel that in your music, in my opinion. And I think that's pretty cool. So it's an opportunity to, live vicariously through the past and, your present experiences, which is super cool.
Well, I appreciate that. Those are the experiences that these mountain men and frontiersmen, they experience this stuff all the time because they were living out there. That's exciting to think about,
Well, now you got me thinking about all the ones who didn't make it. So the guy who walked up on a mountain lion at 4 a.m. with no headlamp, and all of a sudden he's chow and not just going about his day.
I bet you those guys weren't in a hurry to go walking through the dark up there in the high country. They were probably, I'll wait till morning.
I think that's probably a few people make that mistake and don't come back. I think that's a pretty easy thing to learn. But Andy, one of the things I always like to end with is a hypothetical.
Okay.
So I've got one. Hopefully it'll be nice and difficult for you to make a decision, but we'll see. So would you rather be mute and no longer able to sing, but you could pick out any 10-acre piece of land to live on in the United States free and clear for the rest of your life? Or would you rather keep your singing voice, but live out your days in a big city apartment?
I would give up my voice in a freaking minute.
The follow-on question is, it sounds like you've thought of it. If you could pick out a 10-acre parcel anywhere in the U.S., do you have an idea of where that'd be?
True.
It could be national park. It could be wherever.
But the price doesn't matter because
free and clear.
Free and clear. Wow, that plays a big part into it, doesn't it? My goodness. I mean, I'm a big fan of probably Tennessee is great, but it's too dang hot for me. I need a little more of those bitterly cold Idaho and Montana winters, I think. Probably somewhere in North Yellowstone, anywhere in that area, probably. Oh my gosh.
That Gallatin Valley area is pretty. I was there this past week. There's a lot of places out there that are really pretty and would make being quiet for the rest of your life worth it, I think.
Or even on the east side of Yellowstone, that Bighorn area where it's in between Yellowstone and Cody. It's pretty country.
Well, if that comes to fruition, I hope you get a lot more albums out before the voice is lost and you get to go tinker away at whatever you do out in the Bighorns or wherever you pick your parcel. But Andy, I really appreciate it. Genuinely, I'm a huge fan. I'm glad I get to call you a friend, and thanks for coming on to talk trapping with me. Where can people find out more about your music if they don't already know about you, and then maybe a little info on when the album's dropping?
Thank you so much, Zachary. That means a lot. And the best place would be HawkenHorse.com. Hawken as in the rifle that Jeremiah Johnson carried, and horse as in the four-legged critter that he rode. HawkenHorse.com. You can also find me at HawkenHorse Band on Instagram, HawkenHorse on Facebook, and all that stuff. The album comes out July 12th. Volume 1 drops, and including that Coulter song that we talked about. And Volume 2 drops in October. So it's just in time for deer season and
Trapping
all those
season.
those trap line. Exactly. The trap line. I've got it spread out over the entire year here. So there's little perks for those early morning drives.
Perfect. Well, Andy, again, I appreciate it. For those listening, I'll catch you on the next episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. Thanks again, Andy.
Thank you.